in this place there has quite rightly been a focus on the stain that is this government's approach to the treatment of innocent people seeking asylum and the establishment of offshore prisons to act as a deterrent. But what's not talked about as often but is just as brutal, is just as dehumanising, are the virtual prisons that we have created for tens of thousands of innocent people in this country seeking asylum. Over the past few weeks, we've seen the Australian community galvanise around one family, a Tamil family from the central Queensland town of Billawila. The reason that the community has finally rallied around this beautiful family is because we see them as people. This government has tried to deny innocent people their humanity. It calls them illegals. It calls them boat people. But what it doesn't do is acknowledge their humanity. The tens of thousands of people living in this country who have broken no law, who are here innocently seeking our protection, are at breaking point. This government has introduced a practice that has taken away their most basic freedoms and liberties. We have created a virtual prison for these people. A few weeks ago, I visited a mosque and a community centre in Melbourne's northern suburbs, and I met dozens of people who were living on temporary protection visas. Their stories shocked me to the core. These are people living in limbo, with no access to basic services and no idea about what their future might hold. It's difficult to imagine what this is like. These are people who fled the country of their birth because of circumstances outside of their control and find themselves in a country that treats them as though they are common criminals. The desperation of these people was heartbreaking, and today I want to share some of their stories in this place. Let me start with the story of Abdul Reza and Zainab. Abdul Reza arrived in Australia by boat with his daughter in 2013 and sought asylum. They spent 5.5 years on Nauru. Their dream was to be reunited with, his dream was to be reunited with his wife and his 2 children, who left Iran only a short time before they did. They did it because they thought that leaving Iran separately was safer for both of them. They'd been vocal about the Iranian government's occupation of their homeland, of Awaz, and this placed them in certain danger. Of course, the freedom to criticise a government is something we take for granted here in Australia. Now, Abdul Reza and his daughter, while they were in Nauru, established relationships with a number of people, and some of these people they became friends with took their own lives. On the 1st of February this year, they were sent to Australia on a community detention order. And what that means is that they don't have work or study rights. Abdul Reza and Zainab live in Melbourne's western suburbs, but his wife, daughter and son live in the northern suburbs. Abdul Reza and Zainab have a curfew placed on them. They aren't allowed to leave their house outside of the hours of 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. So they spend their days travelling to the north by public transport to see their family. Abdul Reza can only meet his wife between the hours of 8 p.m. and 6 p.m. Their family can only be reunited during that time. Not surprisingly, Abdul Reza and Zainab suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder now after being separated from their family for over a decade. Just imagine travelling halfway around the world to be reunited with your family, then to be separated through community detention. So close, yet miles away. This is what this government has condemned this family to. Then there's the story of Zara and Hoda. Zara and Hoda first cousins, fled a dangerous situation in the Middle East with their family, arrived in Australia in 2013 and were sent to Christmas Island. They were both 13 years old at the time. They spent a month on Christmas Island. They were transferred to a detention centre in Darwin. 28 days later, they were granted a bridging visa with no right to work. They rented a house together. All 9 members of the family lived together. Hoda and Zara completed their English studies in 6 months. They then enrolled in Year 9. They worked through school, completed Year 12. They were bright kids and they did exceptionally well. Hoda got an offer to study biomedical science and Zara got an offer to study nursing. But when you're living in limbo, when you are on a temporary protection visa, you can't access HECS and you certainly can't afford the upfront cost of a university degree. So we've got 2 bright girls, completed their education, studied hard, want to contribute to this nation, who have been turned away. I mean, we're crying out for nurses and doctors and health professionals, and yet this government's cruel migration policies won't allow them to fulfil their dream and contribute to Australia. They've been on the same bridging visa for 7 years. They can't visit their family back home. Their grandmother died recently. They couldn't return to attend the funeral. But of course, if you're born in this country and if your parents are on a TPV, then you have no rights either. Let me tell you the story of Roya and her family. Roya, an Iranian-born refugee who sought asylum in Australia in June 2012 and for the past 7 years has been living in the community on a TPV. In 2017, she gave birth to her son in the western suburbs of Melbourne, a healthy, happy boy at the time. But at the age of 15 months, they noticed that something was wrong. They saw a paediatrician and he was diagnosed with a form of cerebral palsy. Now, we know that is a critical moment for that child. Physiotherapy, speech therapy, at that moment in that child's life can make all the difference to the future life of that person. So Roya, believing that if she had a child here in Australia, would it get access to services, applied for the NDIS. Her claim was rejected because Roya was on a TPV. Here we have a 2-year-old child who has a chance of being able to walk and contribute to society, who's being denied basic health services by this government. And of course there's a story of Al-Sudani and their family. The Al-Sudani family came to Australia in 2012 to seek asylum. 8 months on Nauru, transferred to a camp in Darwin, then while they were having dinner, rounded up and told to get on a bus because they were going to be moved to Christmas Island. On Christmas Island, they were taken to an empty detention centre, housing just them and 6 other families. And then over the following weeks, more people were brought to that camp. The Al-Sudani family moved again, this time to Darwin. 6 months at the detention centre there. Then MITA, the detention centre in Melbourne. Karima, forced pregnant with young Zainab. The family was then sent, again, a community detention order, where they weren't allowed to work or study, where they had to wait until they were granted a bridging visa. Now, the kids went to school, but the parents, of course, under that visa, have no work rights. Again, suffering huge mental anguish. Another bright child, Hussein, enrolled in high school, getting good marks, got a scholarship to undertake a diploma in health studies at RMIT. The response? Well, Centrelink cut their payments of $250 a fortnight because he was not eligible to undertake tertiary study due to his immigration status. So he's quit studying and has been sitting idly ever since. The Refugee Advice and Casework Service warns some TPV visa and SHEV holders are now at breaking point, and I've seen it with my own eyes. These are innocent people. These are decent people who want to make a contribution to this country. And yet here we have laws that treat these people as less than human. It's about time that we as a community came together and recognised their humanity.
Thank you.